Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Thriving Adoptees podcast. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by Julie McGue. Looking forward to another conversation with you today, Julie.
Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Julie's got a new book out, right? And what better reason, if we need any reason, to have another chat? If listeners you've not heard her previous interview, then there'll be links to that in the show notes because it's got to be a while, hasn't it? 3 years maybe since we did an
Uh,
interview together.
we did
Three.
we did one last year when my collection of essays came out,
Yeah.
Belonging Matters, and then one right after Twice a Daughter, the
Yeah.
first book came out in
Yeah.
2021.
So my memory is escaping me at the ripe old age of 58 there, yeah. Um, so what's new for you at the moment in terms of your own learnings and your own take on thriving and well-being and those sorts of things? What's fresh for you, Julie?
Well, I think writing this book, which is not a collection of essays and it's not a search memoir, it is really a coming of age story about my twin sister and I growing up in a family that's made up of adoptees and biological children. So I set out to write this book because, people that I have spoken to at book clubs or on podcasts were asking the question, what was it like to grow up as a twin, adopted with your twin, and what was it like in this family? So what was interesting to me, and anybody that's writing a memoir will find this interesting, I had to go back this time and do a timeline that stretched, from the very beginning when my sister and I were adopted, through another endpoint, which I decided it was when I had my first daughter. And in constructing that timeline, selecting the events to become the chapters of the book was something that was a lot of thought. But also, in going back in time, I realized I needed to do a lot more fact checking on this book. The stories involved other people in my family, most particularly my parents and my siblings. And in doing that, I collaborated with my mom, my adoptive mom, and my twin sister to get some of the stories to the place where everybody was comfortable that the essence of the tale was correct. And that was super fun to collaborate with my mom and collaborate with my sister. I will say to you, I learned a lot. I learned a lot about what I didn't know, but also about myself in the process. Some family secrets came out in asking questions about some of the stories. And I encourage listeners to think about doing that themselves, constructing maybe a timeline for their own story or their own life and how you would tell it to your next generation, um, and spilling it out and asking family members questions because we have this selective memory when we go back and think about our past, but how it intersects with our family adds another dimension to our family history. So, those are the things I've been thinking about and learning about. And the reaction to the book has been really, really positive, both within my family and in the adoption community. Um,
Yeah.
so,
So what were there a few kind of standout changes where the truth that you've got to this time was different to how you'd seen events when you created the timeline itself? Was there much at odds? Was there a much of a change of the story after the conversation?
yeah, I would say yes. There were some things that I decided weren't important. And how a writer does that is examine their themes. So I knew my themes were going to be about family building, how my parents built their family with adoptees and biological children, which happened after the fact. So the three adoptees came first, and then the biological kids came. So it was about family building, and it was also about my sister and I navigating this experience together in lockstep every step of the way, which you and I've spoken about before. What a blessing that was to be adopted with my twin and raised with a full sibling. And I'm completely cognizant of how rare that is, and grateful for Catholic Charities policy to keep twins together. Um, the book is also about loss. And, you know, you and I talked about this another time about loss is baked into the equation of adoption, right? So not only does an adoptee lose their identity, especially if you're from the closed adoption era, like I was, we lose some sense of belonging too. But our adoptive parents, you know, my parents got had the right to raise biological children, but so many adoptive parents don't receive those rights because of infertility or what have you, or age, whatever. And then the birth parents' loss of not being able to raise their biological child. So all those things get factored in this new book, but also my parents and my siblings and I lost a sister. My parents lost a child when I was 16. And that particular set of circumstances is something that I write about in the book. She was a special needs child, which was another dimension to the family. And how families deal with loss can be devastating to a family and a relationship. And in examining the timeline that we were talking about, I realized, you know, how tough that was on my parents' marriage, but the strong set of family values that they had, their commitment to each other and their commitment to our family. There was the grieving period, and we came out of it. And I think, you know, one of the reasons people like to read memoir is to read other people's stories and see how the characters in those books navigate tough things. And that's why I chose to write about this is, you know, we've got the adoption experience going on. We've got this special needs biological child. Then she passes away. And then it's time for me to build my own family. So the book kind of touches on a lot of themes, love and loss and sisterhood. But I think essentially what it is about is to have a strong family. It doesn't matter if it's biological kids or adopted kids. It's all about the tone, the family, the parents' value system, and what gets instilled in you to create, you know, some kind of um, benchmark for dealing with other adversity later in life.
Thank you. I didn't ask the question right. So let me take another go. Let me give you a little example, something that came to me last year at some point, right? So I gave away earlier that I'm 58, right? So this is last year. So I'm 57. Around 40 years before that, right? So I'm 17 or 18 years old. I was walking back. I was walking back from the pub with a friend of mine, and we bumped into an ex-girlfriend of mine. And well, a girlfriend is a massive overstatement. Like I dated her for a couple of weeks, a month maybe, and she was with her boyfriend, this big guy who's like 6 inches taller than me and about 2 foot wider, right? And her mum. And as they walked towards me, that we were walking out of town, they were walking into town. And she blanked me, right? She ignored me. And
Mm.
I I said, "Oh, don't say hello then, Fiona." And thought no more of it, right? About 2 months, about 2 minutes later, I turned around to chat to my friends that were behind me on the pavement, and this fist arrived in my face, right? And I went down because this guy was huge. So the boyfriend had walked into town with this girl and the girl's mum. and then come back to get me. Right. And I went down, and he was starting to kick me on the floor, and one of the friends was with me, stopped him and said he's had enough. He's down, right? And I had a huge black eye, and it was pretty tricky, right? 40 years later, I heard a story from somebody else. Um, Something happened, and I saw a new truth. I saw that rather this girl had uh, she had ignored me because she knew that this bloke, this boy, was the jealous type and an
Mm,
angry guy, and and that's why she blanked me, because she didn't want to trigger, to use an emotive word. She didn't want to trigger her boyfriend. And then so this was like a big, well, a big it's another insight moment. So how I'd viewed the past changed. So the question I was asking, and I didn't ask it very succinctly, was, have you seen, in revisiting the past, the timelines, for the new book, have you seen new truths? Have you seen the world differently from the way that you used to see it?
well, yes, and I think that that's part of the story that I tell. It whenever you tell a memoir, you're presenting a scene or an experience, and then you're giving your reflection or your takeaway. So when you're writing a coming of age memoir, like I did, you're in that scene and that voice with that person at that age. So the teenager, the child experiencing things, and then the narrative voice pipes in and gives your takeaway from the perspective of the now narrator. So yes, that did happen. Um, for example, my mom had just given birth to my youngest sister, the one that passes away, and I was injured at school in a tryout for a sport, and nobody answered the phone. The gym teacher kept trying my mom. She's not answering the phone. We lived almost a mile from school. So I had to walk home by myself, injured. I was angry. I was upset. I felt abandoned, neglected, all of those things. And if you've grown up in a big family, you realize how it is. Each time a child is added to the family, you get further and further away from the amount of attention that you used to enjoy. Anyway, so I had all this burning anger about it and got home and just let my mom have it. And of course, she'd been up all night with this new baby. She was feeding the baby. She was tired. She'd been taking a nap, which is why she didn't, answer the phone. And in figuring out that timeline, I realized, I was age appropriate, kind of a little brat. It was all about me. But now as an adult, I realized, my goodness, all of the challenges that she was facing as a new mother again and managing this household of 6 kids was exorbitant. I mean, we're parents now and grandparents, and we realize all how hard that all was. So, yes, to answer your question, I did have more realizations about my mom and her parenting in writing the book.
Yeah. So were they along that empathy theme then?
Absolutely. Absolutely. But also, um, I think, and you probably understand this, when you're writing something about, you know, let's just say, um, learning to ride a bicycle or whatever, and from a big family, we had to share a lot of things. Um, the adoptee lens always gets put on, you know. Um, I was always grateful that my parents could afford some things for us. But you're also, if you're honest with yourself, your head voice is telling you, I wonder if this would have been the case in my birth family, if I had, my birth parents had kept us and raised us as their own. There's always that little doubtful voice saying, what would my other life had been like compared to this one. And that's something that I put in play in this book is inject that idea through childhood, adolescence, and into college that, you're always wondering. You're always wanting to turn the page and see if this is really the life you're supposed to have, or is this the life you were meant to have? You know what I'm saying?
The questioning, it all adds to
Yes.
the
Yes.
questioning. And now, because that questioning can be a kind of a matter of fact questioning, or it can be imbued, is, if I don't know if that's the right word. It can, or it can be more emotional questioning, and it's probably, I'm categorizing two things there, but it's probably far more of a spectrum,
Hmm.
right? Um, so
And
to
the reason I bring it up is, I had siblings that weren't adopted. So I don't believe that they ever questioned anything. This was the life they were born into. This was the life that they were meant to have. Whereas an adoptee, the questioning piece is this how my other parents would have parented us, me? Um, would I have been happy? All of these unknown musing kind of things
yeah,
were going on as I was growing up. And that's the things that I inject into this story
yeah,
with the overlay of this family building that was happening.
yeah. So how much emotional charge was there to those musings, those questionings?
I think as a kid, you don't focus on anything too long. So they were just musings, thoughts that came in and out. And certainly I had the luxury of talking about any of those musings with my twin sister in the privacy of the room that we shared. So that was a blessing. You and I have talked before about adoptee fantasies. We have these fantasies of because we can't know what our circumstances. I mean, I do know what they are now, but back then I couldn't know what my birth parents were about, where they were from, anything about them. And so we make up stories about that. Anytime we don't know, we make up stories to fill the gaps. And boy, the story we made up about our birth parents, him being a football player, high school football player, her being the head cheerleader. They had a little romance, but they wanted to go to college. And so they placed us for adoption. Couldn't have been further from the truth. Because as I point out in Twice a Daughter, my first memoir, she was 26 years old when she had my sister and I. And my birth father was a little bit younger, but they were very much adults, co-workers in a relationship. And so it was way more complicated than my little musing
Yeah.
childhood fantasy was all about.
So when you say fantasy, you're putting a gloss on it, and I I also think of that, when we're faced with the unknown, we can put a gloss on it, or we can catastrophize it, like we could, and everything in between, and our imagination can run riot in a good way, or in a dark way, so it becomes a bit of a nightmare. Were there any changes that you saw that were for the better, those were for the worse, as you process this new book, as you
Um,
expand?
yes, yes, something really surprising came out in writing the chapters about my sister passing away. There were things that my parents hadn't shared with us about what my mom went through, taking my sister to the hospital and having her pass away and not be revived in the emergency room. Um, I'm pretty sure that had I not been writing this book and quizzing my mom, that some of the things that she shared with me would have gone to her grave with her. and not come out. Um, when I shared what I learned, and I'm not going to give it away so that people
Yeah.
do feel compelled to pick up the story. Um, when I shared what I learned from my mom with my siblings, all of us kind of went, oh, what? So, you know, I think when parents are parenting, there's adult information. So I give my mom a free pass on this. Adult information doesn't always, as particularly back in the 60s and 70s, um, you weren't privy to everything that was going on. But I think we were also naive enough that we didn't ask too many questions. We were in our own story, in our own head, trying to be teenagers. And so we weren't in that adult world to ask some of the adult questions that I was able to ask my mom. So yes, I did learn an awful lot. Um, and it's interesting. Well, the book's been out a month now, so there's been quite a few folks that have read it and responded to me personally or written reviews or whatever. And when you're from the outside the adoption space, some of the things that I wrote about an aunt who was not particularly kind to my sister and my brother and I, um, probably because we were adopted into the family and not born into it. One can only suppose. But writing about those things is eye-opening to people outside the adoption experience. They don't they don't see they don't see the inequality sometimes that happens in families. You've interviewed enough guests, Simon, that you probably have had angry adoptees that you've spoken to that were not treated the same as the biological kids. I did not have that from my own parents, but there were relatives that treated us differently. And I think highlighting that is a good thing for readers to see these kinds of things go on. I think one of the reasons I wrote the book was also to abolish some of those myths about adoption. There is great joy with adoption. My parents got an instant family. They got twice the family when they adopted my sister and I. And then again, when they adopted my brother, they had what would be considered a full family of two girls and a boy. But with that came a lot of hard work. They waited a long time to have children. They didn't come easily. And certainly the struggles were not done. And I think when you highlight people's stories, you realize, oh, family building is hard work, regardless if it includes adoption. Nowadays it includes IVF and surrogacy to build a family. It's not easy. It wasn't easy back then. It's not easy now. And so I think the family building piece of it is a universal theme that a lot of readers will resonate with, even if they're not adopted or know somebody that's adopted.
So to circle back on our what was our first interview, what does thriving adoptees, what does that mean for you now, Julie?
Um, I I want to go back to talking about Twice a Daughter to answer that question. One of the things that I didn't realize until I found both of my birth parents and some birth relatives, and I was in my early 50s at the time, was how much I was needing that all along to have some connection to who I was before I was adopted. And figuring out how to find them, and figuring out how to connect and have a relationship or not with some of them was troubling. And to get through that and have this self knowledge to be in the place that I am now, I'm so glad I did all that. Because I think it does allow us to thrive um, better and contribute to society if we have all of our little secrets answered.
Yeah. Is it seems to me it marks the the whether it's an end to the secrets or the end to the question, the end the search reveals the truth, and it's one less thing for us to worry about, I guess.
Right. I think our psyche is really busy with that, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And until we resolve that um, question, we're not completely who we need to be.
So it's a revelation of ourselves then.
Yes. And some people can reconcile it easily. I think it's easier for men to say, this is the life I was meant to have. They gave me up for adoption, and that's their problem. I'm good. And I think that that does work for some folks. For me, and what I was talking about in this book, Twice the Family, was I was always wondering, I was always musing, and I needed to figure out what that was all about. And it took me until I was nearly 50 years old when the laws changed in the state of Illinois and I had access to my original birth record um, to be able to solve that question.
Yeah.
And how sad for all of us that are adopted and want to have answers to questions that the laws in each individual state in the United States are different. We don't all have access to information. We're aging adults. We should have access to this information, particularly medical history, which is why my search started in the first place. Um, and I'll get on my high wagon here and say there still can be, even if an adoptive parents were not in favor of contact with the birth parents, and even if the biological parents don't want contact with the adoptee, there should be some kind of vehicle, some kind of portal that an adoptee can go to and not disrupt everybody's privacy, but have access to important information about heredity, medical history, what have you. Um, we're just not there yet, but we have to keep talking about it and fighting for it because everybody should have access to any piece of information that concerns them. It should not be hidden away at the detriment of our health and well-being.
Taking you back a couple of minutes, you were alluding to a difference between genders. What do you think is that difference?
My brother, who's 2 years younger than I am, was also adopted, and I dragged him to a lot of post-adoption support group meetings for 2 years. He sat next to me like a listener, listening to people's stories, who was fighting harder, what things were happening to adoptees and birth parents trying to connect with birth relatives. It took him 2 years to decide whether he wanted to go through that struggle or not. Most of the people in the support group meetings I was attending were women. Most of the birth parents were birth mothers trying to find their child, and most of the adoptees were women. So I don't know why males seem less inclined to do so, but that is the case.
Yeah. And far more women listen to this show than men.
Interesting.
So it's uh, I mean, I have a theory. I have a theory on it, and it's about family building, and it's about uh, the differences in, you know, the different genders and their different approach to to family building, and perhaps I must have got this from somewhere else. It's to do with the maternal bond or the maternal drive, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and having that as a woman and seeing what could be stronger than that. What
Yeah, and I
what
think
could out?
also
Yeah,
to your point, as a mother, when I had my first child, which is how my book finishes, I'm having my first child. oddly enough, at 26, which was the same age as my birth mom had, my sister and I. And my first child was a daughter too. So there were a lot of parallels. I remember looking at her and holding her and thinking, I don't know how my birth mom could have done that. Placed my sister and I for adoption, but she never did see us. Never did hold us. And I think the fact that she didn't do any of those things probably was what enabled her to make that really, really hard decision.
Yeah, and you summed it up there in my theory, which was general.
Mm-hmm.
You summed it up in a far more precise way. Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. You know,
Mm-hmm.
what could how could they? How could she?
Mm-hmm.
Um, was that a new thing for you on was that a new realization for
No,
you, or was
I
it
think I always thought,
thought
because
that?
each time my parents added a child to our family, my mother was just so joyous and pleased with this, and full of love holding this new baby and nurturing and whatever. So I saw all the love and felt it from on my own regard. And so it was easy to see it and say, how could a mother do that?
Yeah.
And this is my example of a mother, and she's loving and kind and overjoyed to be a mother. Um, how could somebody not want that experience?
So it
And
was the
and
same.
we know what the answer is,
Yeah.
right? The birth mothers back in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, if you were an unwed mother, you were so shamed by society, disowned by your family, sent off to women's homes to take care of this problem that you've put on the family. So it wasn't because she didn't want to be a mother. Society's concept of what a mother was not what she could be. You couldn't be a single woman and raise a child back in the 1950s and 60s. When a woman became pregnant back in that era, they left their job and they stayed home. That was the expectation. So, yeah, I think as adults, we understand the constraints back in that time period for a woman to keep a child. It would not have been possible. I get that, but why couldn't we know that? Why did that have to be yet another one of those closed adoption secrets? Very harmful. I think parental rights, both for the birth parent and the adoptive parent, were always at the forefront in creating adoption law and statutes. The adoptees' rights and uh, interests were down the totem pole, at the bottom. And I think all the noise, like we've talked about before, that we're making now in this space. I was reading that the state of Virginia is another state that's about to change their statutes and having some problems getting it through the legislature. It's such a battle. And you ask yourself, why should it be such a battle to allow someone to understand their identity
Yeah.
and figure out their own sense of belonging? It shouldn't be so complicated, but it,
Well,
it, it still is.
bureaucracies aren't meant to change, are they?
No,
Bureaucracies aren't meant to change. Um, that question that came to you, how could she? When just after you give birth to your first child at 26, was was that bigger? Was it a bigger thing for you in that moment than it had been before? Was it was
I
it a
know.
bigger
I
realization? Was it a bigger
I
feeling?
think I think I played with it more, the idea more as a soon-to-be parent than I did as a teenager. Certainly the idea was there, and I did wonder about it, but I think I played with it more when I had that realization of what it felt like to be a
Yeah,
mother and hold a child and realize all the factors that went into placing a child for adoption and what might have been going on.
yeah. What? what's becoming clearer and clearer to me is that these understandings just get deeper and deeper. That's kind of what's behind my question. I used to think that answers to questions were a yes or a no or a one or a zero, and yet like you had the insight, you know that two plus two is four, and once you know that, you don't forget it. And but there, it seems to me that the deeper stuff it just keeps on getting deeper, right? So if I put on a, if I, you talked about a kind of an adoptee lens. If, if I can uh, put that back on, the little story that I'd shared about the guy hitting me and why, what caused me what caused me to say to this girl, right? Um, don't even say hello then, this kind of I can see that as another piece to the another supporting piece to the kind of rejection thing. Do you
Hmm.
see what I mean? That's another level. Sorry, that's another example of what I call the projection of rejection. So if we've got some rejection, we've got some insecurities going on about this. Uh, we've got some insecurities going on within ourselves, and so we kind of project rejection on the world outside,
Yeah,
right? So
right.
I took it personally, right? I took the this I took this girl's uh, ignoring me as personal. I thought it was something to do with me, right? And then I realized it's nothing to do with me. It's nothing. It was all to do with her um,
She
boyfriend,
was
new boyfriend.
yeah, she was protecting you from
She
him.
was projecting me from him, right? So that's another kind of uh, that's another example where my projection was incorrect. I projected I projected rejection that wasn't there. I made up I made up in my head that this was a rejection because of an adoptee insecurity lens, right?
Right, right. And I think we have to be very careful about that and how we look at situations that are even happening now. Are we looking at it from a rational mind, or do we have that little lens
Lens.
um, that we can't help but have, but need to really work on separating um, those feelings from really what's going on?
Yeah. And the more we look at it, the more glimpses, the more we see how the lens is distorting our view, then the
Yep.
deeper, then in this case, the deeper our felt sense of security grows.
Right, right. And I do think by talking about it today and also in reading stories like mine that share that adoptee lens, the people that love us, the people that we have in our lives, it gives them a little bit better insight in how we react to things and maybe how to manage us or manage our relationships with them to understand that this might be going on. This natural tendency to feel rejected, to feel abandoned, maybe to have trust issues. All of those things are baked into the adoptee mindset, and we have to work on it. But then the people that love and care for us also have to be cognizant that this might be going on.
Yeah. Have you? It's just gone. The guys. Oh yeah. It was another author actually. I don't know if I've asked you about him. I haven't name checked him much recently. Um, have you ever come across an author called Sydney Banks? Have you come across
I
him?
don't know of him.
No.
No.
Okay. So he was an adoptee. He died, I don't know, 20 years or so ago. He was a Scottish welder that moved to Canada. And he, so he was a blue collar guy, right? A welder
Hmm.
working in a factory, a paper mill, I think it was, on Salt Spring Island, I think in British Columbia. So he's an adoptee. He was having some marital issues. I think this was in the 70s. And um, he was going for a weekend, like a weekend's couples thing to try and patch things up or whatever, to help him navigate the difficulties that they were having, help them navigate the difficulties we were having. And he was, as part of this weekend, he was out for a little hike with another guy who was there, and he was a therapist, a marriage therapist or something like that. And uh, Sid Banks said something about insecure, and this guy said to him, you're not insecure. You just think you are, Sid." And that triggered like a big, huge, like it's a fairly, as I say, it's a fairly small, kind of insequential comment from this guy, but it had a huge impact on on Sid, and Sid's his whole life changed on that moment, and
Hmm.
his demeanor changed, his whole look changed to such an extent that when he went into work on Monday, they didn't actually recognize him. His whole outlook had changed. His face had changed. Um, a huge weight had been lifted off his shoulders just on the basis, of an insight he'd had, um, into the extent that our thoughts or our lens, to use your word that you've been using, the lens word that you mentioned, his whole world changed for him on that basis, on that
Yeah.
on that insights, and like 550 episodes into this podcast, people say that time is the greatest healer. Well, it's not. There's lots of people still struggling, right? Lots of adoptees struggling. If there's no change over that time, then
Right. And I think
nothing happens.
whether you're like me, an adoptee that is writing for publication, or an adoptee that's just writing in journals to heal, the importance of getting help, whether it's professionally through post-adoption support groups, um, or writing in your journal. I mean, I think you do have to have some level of introspection, but somebody weighing in to moderate, and maybe give you a
Yeah,
catchphrase, like you just said, uh, for that individual that makes a difference in their life and how they view their experience, to
yeah.
change it and be more positive going forward. So um,
That
it's
because
always
time.
fun to
So,
talk.
if what do you think? What do you think changes if time isn't the greatest healer? What do you think is?
Oh, I think the introspection is important. Um, I seem to gravitate to writing my own stories for other people to get some meaning from them, but that is not the way for everybody. You can certainly write to heal on your own, and to have some kind of expert, whether it's a social worker or a fellow adoptee, that kind of gives you an insight that makes you change the way you look at your adoption or any problem,
Yeah,
certainly to move on and move forward because one of the things that I like to say as we get older, um, we're always becoming. We're not this stagnant person. We're changing in our relationships, but changing within society. And we are always becoming. And it's important for us to figure out always how to get to the next step, either on our own or with the help of others in our lives.
Yeah. You you said the word that I believe is the biggest healer in there. And I just wanted to dig it out to kind of underline it for the listeners. You said the word insight, right?
Hmm.
So I talk about this like hanging around at the bus stop for insights, right? So journaling can create insights. Talking to a therapist can create insights. It's somebody else can prompt insights within us. They can provoke insights. They can catalyze insights. Listening to the podcast is about insights. Realizing that insights are the greatest healer is huge, huge, huge. Well, it's huge in my world, in my mind, because everybody's looking for what drives change. Well, insights drive change, and that's kind of where I was going at the start of the conversation, where I was asking you in probably rather unwieldy language about your insights. So what would you say were your most, what would say the most impactful insights of writing this last book?
Just being able to set the family timeline, create some family history for my children and grandchildren, but also kind of setting the history right with my mom and some of the family secrets that hadn't come out. I think there was a lot of healing that came out of my mom filling in the holes of a story. Um, so it was not an easy book to write, but certainly I think one of the most rewarding because it's provided backstory to Twice a Daughter, and I think it provides a lot of family history that my family's happy to have.
Yeah. And does any particular moment strike you from the process, or afterwards, like you've been talking about it? You've been interviewed,
I don't think I can add any more than what
what you've
we've
already
already
said.
shared today. I hope that people, after listening to the podcast, will pick up both books, Twice a Daughter and Twice the Family. You can read them out of sequence. They are meant to stand alone. And anybody that's writing memoir, it's also indicative of the different kinds of books that you can write, whether it's the search memoir or the coming of age story. Um, I think it's important to write your story or understand your own story as you move through adoption and family building in and of itself.
Yeah. Thanks, Julie.
Thank you,
Anything you want
Simon.
to ask me?
Uh, no, I'm following you on social media, so I know what you're up to, and
Cool.
I appreciate you having me back for the third time.
Cool. Thanks, Julie. Thanks, listeners. We'll speak to you very soon. Take care. Bye bye.
Great.